Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Rachel Patton, Executive Director of Preserve Arkansas. Preserve Arkansas is the statewide nonprofit advocate for historic preservation. Welcome to the first presentation in our 2024 Women in Preservation series. This program is generously supported by DMX Architecture of Fayetteville. Many of you are already members of Preserve Arkansas, and we thank you for your generous support. But if you're not already a member, I'd like to invite you to formally join us for as little as $50 a year. Your membership provides vital support to our organization and allows us to continue the important work of saving Arkansas's historic places. Join us again on March the 12th for a talk by Dr. Mary Beth Trubitt, Research Station Archaeologist at Henderson State University in Arkadelphia. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Amber Jones. Amber Jones is a historic preservation consultant specializing in the historic rehabilitation tax credit, National Register listings, and facade easements. She has been preparing federal and state tax credit documents and facilitating the sale of the Arkansas tax credit for property owners since 2010. To date, she has completed more than 400 projects, with property owners receiving over $20 million in federal and state tax credits collectively, with about $14 million in state credits funded to cash. She has projects statewide in Arkansas. Amber lives in an 1890s Queen Anne Victorian in Little Rock's Quapaw Quarter with her husband Scott and their 3 daughters. Their home and family were featured on an episode of Sci-Fi Channel's Ghost Hunters in 2013. Welcome, Amber.
Hello.
Hello, I can see you.
All right, I did something right. Only a little bit more to go. Okay, so I go ahead and get started on my PowerPoint?
Yes, if you can share your screen over this one. Perfect.
Okay, we ready?
Okay, yes, ready.
Okay. Ooh. Okay, here's my little attempt at animation. I did this to Barbie, not because I'm really like Barbie, but I just thought it would be cute and something different. I haven't worn high heels like really in years. So, and my feet are very flat. So here we have it, Historic Preservation Barbie. And I always go ahead and stick my name in because there's like a million Joneses and there are some Amber Joneses, but I really don't go by Amber Carter Jones. But so many people say, oh, it's Amber Carter Jones. So whatever. So these are my parents, Mary Ann and Jim Carter, and maybe they are considered the original Barbie and Ken of their time. Beautiful people. Everyone always says I look like my mom. I think maybe I'm starting to look more like my dad. But they were married for 5 years total, and they divorced when I was 2. So I grew up being one of those children that had to go every other weekend to whatever parent and fun holiday times and whatever. My parents actually lived around primarily in downtown Little Rock, where I live. And when I look in the city directories, I can find them living on Gaines Street in a house that was an apartment at the time that's now a single family home again. But here is a picture when I was born. Just as an aside, my mom, who gained 50 pounds when she was pregnant with me, thought that she would lose all of her weight when she had me. And so she only took her pre-pregnancy clothes to wear home from the hospital. So she had some trauma there in multiple ways. These are some pictures of me and my mom and dad at the zoo with some kind of iconic Little Rock elements. Laughing Sally over here with my dad. He looks so comfortable holding a baby, doesn't he? My mom with me in front of the reptile house, the WPA building, and then the carousel horses that I actually just rode with my 7-year-old nephew back in January. When I found these pictures, I was asking my mom, who was a natural redhead, I'm just like, is your hair blonde? Did you dye your hair blonde? And she was like, no. I'm like, did you have a wig? And she was like, oh, yes, I had a wig. So my redheaded mother had a blonde wig for some period of time. I think she said it was because she lost a lot of her hair when she had me, one of those byproducts of pregnancy. And so this is me as a child. My grandfather bred horses as a side gig. He also worked for Borden Dairy. And that was a big part of my upbringing, with him working here in Little Rock at Borden Dairy. He was a 40-year employee. He started out in Forest City and sharecropping with his father. And my grandmother, the story goes that to escape the sharecropping of never having enough and never going to have their own property because they were sharecropping with his parents, they literally, like the sound of music, pushed the car down the driveway in the dead of night and didn't start it up till they got quite a bit of ways so no one would hear them leaving. But my grandmother had secured my grandfather a job at Terry Dairy, which is over here. The building is over here off Scott Street, a few blocks from my home. And that eventually was bought by Borden Dairy. So I just kind of enjoy having this history all around me. And it is one of the things that drew me back to Little Rock. Is I remember this childhood that I had of my grandparents and parents being here in Little Rock. This picture with the ram's horn antique chair, my mom bought that chair at some little mom and pop antique shop, and that chair and its mate rocking chair are in my bedroom now. So I've held on to so many things that my mother enjoyed antiques, and I grew up with that. Um, So here is me with a Barbie cake that my grandmother made. And me and my mom at the rocket slide at North Little Rock that did not get blown away by the tornado that we had last year that went through that area. And then me and my grandpa Dennis, who I was named after. My middle given name is Denise, so it's Amber Denise. But he gave me a horse before I was born. And so we've always had this, horse thing going on in the background, much to my husband's dismay. But my grandfather also did not understand why you would want someone else's old stuff. So he never really understood why I wanted to live in an old house, or why my mother and I both enjoyed antiques, and was always ready to get rid of old stuff in their house. This birthday picture with him, there's a black chair in the background with an arch. I have that set of chairs that my aunt recovered, but so here it is still hanging around, even though he would probably have taken it to the dump given his druthers. When my parents divorced, my mother had been, before they married, and then became again the manager of the Magnolia Inn on Roosevelt Road. The building is still there, and I think it's a retirement home of some sort. But I lived at the Magnolia Inn for a few years in the manager's area, which was behind manager's apartment, which was behind the front desk. And because of its proximity to Barton Coliseum, all these major musical stars and shows like the Ice Capades would come to Barton Coliseum, and then they would stay at the Magnolia Inn. So here is some photos I found just online of Elvis at the Magnolia Inn. And I think my mother has an album that is signed by Elvis. I know she has one that's signed by Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, and just a bunch of different stars that came through there. And then we used to stay in the Elvis suite on the weekends. It was a double room that was directly off the pool area. I think the pool is gone, but anyway, so that's a neat little early history I have. Um, so in like 1975, 76, my mother remarried and we moved to Russellville. And one of the conditions of my mother marrying my stepfather was that he get me into the Catholic school in Russellville, Arkansas, which was full. And so he used to call Sister Josita, I guess weekly, asking if there was room for me because, and he finally told her, this woman is not going to marry me unless I get her child in school here. And I had been going to Our Lady of Good Counsel here in Little Rock. So over Christmas break, miraculously, a spot became available and for me to start school in January after the new year. And so my mother and stepfather married like on New Year's Eve. So that began my story of growing up in Russellville. So we moved to Russellville, where my stepfather's family lived, and I did all the things that a lot of girls do growing up. My mom was our Girl Scout leader at the school, so I was in Girl Scouts, and I went on a cultural exchange to Great Britain, a Girl Guide, Girl Scout exchange, when I was in my teens. But my mom ran an aquatic school just outside of Russellville in London. I grew up with an indoor pool that we worked around the clock to pay for. But so I grew up teaching sailing and canoeing and swimming and horse riding, and was very involved in a family way in a small setting. Um, and and just by the same token, though, when I'm in the public school system there, I was just very bashful and shy, was not very confident without my mother guiding whatever it was I was doing. I was very attached and still am to my mother. I took piano lessons from the time I was 6, all the way through college. I was a music major. In middle school, I started violin, which I was horrible at. I grew up listening to classical music and I knew what the violin was supposed to sound like, but I could not create that sound to save my life. So I struggled with that. In college, I changed to cello, and that was amazing. That was apparently the stringed instrument I was supposed to be on. But I was awarded a music scholarship, and so it just was very easy to continue with music and study music education at Arkansas Tech. Um, I probably should have been studying history, honestly, but music was what I knew and what I'd been given the money for, and so it was easy just to do that. And fortunately, I did, because I ended up meeting and marrying, the man I've been with for 31 years, Scott Jones. He was a music major too. He's a few years older than me, and so he finished when he finished his first degree in music education, he stayed and got another degree in computer science while I was finishing my music education degree. Um, so here on the screen, we've got my senior picture in high school, and then we have a picture of me and Scott, one of our engagement pictures. This was a few years into college. So I graduated in 89, and so this photo of me and Scott is probably about 90 or 91. And here was a telltale sign that my husband probably should have run away at this point, or boyfriend at the time. But I became a resident assistant. My room and board was paid for me to work in the dorm. And I started out in one of the 1970s dorms, but then I ended up getting moved to Caraway Hall, which at the time was the athletic dorm, which was an absolute nightmare. Could do a whole nother PowerPoint on being an RA in the athletic women's dorm, but we won't. So the top picture is actually it's the front of the building, but it faces the courtyard. And the bottom picture is the back of the building that faces Whataburger. I ended up moving into this dorm to be the resident assistant, and this building was built in 1934, and it has built-in closets that have a closet system similar to this picture on the far right. And painted doors. Everything was painted kind of a pinky beige, the walls, the trim, the whole 9 yards. And then it had these cute little toggle latches. And I had money from being work study in the music office and a lifeguard, and then my room and board was paid, and had this music scholarship, and also had a Pell Grant. So I had a little bit of money, and somehow I found a person, this, of course, this was 30 years ago, that would dip woodwork to strip it. And here I was at like 19, 20 years old, and I contacted this person that I wanted these doors stripped, and they came and took the doors. They were gone for several weeks. And then they finished the doors a little bit. I remember then they brought them back. They had a lot of graining, and they were shiny, and they'd even stripped the hardware and reinstalled them. And this most beautiful wood finish door in this otherwise beige room, doors, there was like 5 of them. I really wanted to go look and see if they're still stripped, but another part of me did not want to be heartbroken if some other student or whatever they use that building for now has been repainted. So that was me, like at 19, out there stripping woodwork. I grew up with my parents and my dad in their respective remarriages working on their homes, but we never had like a historic home or a 1920s home. So they were never doing this. I don't really know where that came from, my compulsion to do this. But anyway, there it was. And you know, I don't know. So Scott and I, in 1992, we got married in Little Rock at St. Andrew's Cathedral. As you can see, it was a very small wedding. Ha ha. And we got married in Little Rock over Thanksgiving break, and then we had to go back to Tech after the break, back to married housing, back for us to finish up school. In 1994, we graduated, me for the first time, Scott for the second time, and we ended up moving to Little Rock because Scott got hired at Systematics, which became Alltel. And the way that happened was that my piano teacher, her brother was vice president of Systematics, and Scott he was doing a lot of job interviews, but he was not getting callbacks. And I'm sitting in a piano lesson in the summer, and she asked me, well, how is the job hunt going? And I said, well, he really wants to work here, but, he's not getting called back. And she's like, well, my brother is the vice president. She walks 5 feet to the telephone on her desk, picks up the phone, and calls Ken Hatfield, her brother. And Scott's name is moved to the top of the pile. And within like 2 weeks, he is going to California for training. We are having to pack up. Well, they sent movers to pack us out of our 1920s rent house. This is not it on the screen. But so we lived with Scott's mom in North Little Rock for a time while we were looking for homes. But this ended up on the screen, 121 Booker, being our first house. It's about 3 houses behind Pizza de Action on Markham. And just a wonderful bungalow. I believe it was a 1921. It was its year, and loved that house. It had an architectural addition on the back of it. And we were there a few years, and we had Eilish, our first daughter. And so that was the home we brought her home to. Scott got me hydrangeas for Mother's Day that year. Eilish was born on Mother's Day, and it was my dad's 50th birthday. So many bizarre things always happen to us at the same time. Bizarre meaning childbirth, I guess. But anyway, and I taught music at St. Edward's for a couple of years. And then when Eilish was born, I was a stay-at-home mom, and I taught piano. And Scott accused me of running off my piano students because I did not have much patience for them when they did not come to their lessons, well practiced or well rehearsed. And so anyway, I was a frustrated piano teacher and trying to raise a child that was a baby that was very curious and into everything. And I thought this first home, we just enjoyed it so much. It had a wraparound porch, and my grandmother came over and cut the base shoe, or what some people would call quarter round, but it's really bigger than quarter round for these size houses. But it didn't have the trim around the hardwood floor and the baseboard. And so my grandmother came from Benton and brought her miter saw, and we had bought the material. And so she taught us, how to cut the copes and fit it all together. So we didn't have to do a lot of work on this house, but right after Eilish, as was our plan, we got pregnant again in a few months. And so we were expecting another baby. There was a house for sale a block away. We sold this house, and then the house a block away ended up falling through because they ended up remodeling it instead of restoring it. And again, I do not know. At this time, I was about 25 years old. I don't know where it came from that, I really knew and understood the difference between remodeling and restoring. But I would push Eilish in her stroller while I was huge pregnant over to this house that we were buying, and they were finishing supposedly. And everything they'd have me pick out, from the stove to hardware, I'd walk over there and it'd be something else that I hadn't picked out that they had installed. And so I was quite the, irritated pregnant woman. And it was such a mess. They had to let us out of the contract, but we'd already sold our house. So that was the catalyst of us moving downtown. And so we bought this home at 2201 State Street, and we moved in, and 3 weeks later we had our second child, Brogan. She was born December 19th. My mother's birthday is December 24th, and I so badly did not want her to be born on December 24th that I would be outside raking every day trying to inspire labor to happen before Christmas Eve. So I got my wish, and she was born on December 19th. And right after we moved into this house, and it has a tile roof. And is the first time it rained, and it was raining in the house, even though we'd had it inspected, had a great inspector, but he didn't catch the empty water buckets in the attic were probably because they were empty because it hadn't rained. But anyway, we were dealing with, who repairs a tile roof, and kept working on that and having different people try to do different things short of relaying the roof, when the January 1999 tornado came through, and we had relayed the front slope of the roof with its original tile and a few replacements. I don't think we'd even paid the bill, and the tornado came through and crushed the entire roof. It was up there, but everything was broken. And our insurance, thankfully, paid for us to get a brand new tile roof. Even though there was nothing, we were not in capital zoning. This house was 1 block out of capital zoning. It ended in our backyard. And we were not eligible for any grants because we were not in capital zoning, because there was nothing that said that we had to maintain the historic integrity of the house. And we did consider putting an asphalt shingle roof on the house. And again, now I'm 26, and I would, tell Scott, I'm like, it's going to kill me if I have to put an asphalt shingle roof on this house. And so fortunately, we got the insurance to pay for it, and it got a brand new tile roof, hunter green instead of the limey green, green glazed. That is still there to this day. And Dr. Lee Nails and his wife Lana bought the house from us after we'd had it about 6 years. And we sold this house to get the next house, which was 4 blocks away from this house. So now we have moved downtown, much to part of our family's dismay of moving to the hood. But we did everything you're supposed to do. We would go and camp out, at midnight and in the neighborhood and kind of see what was going on. It was always quiet. There was never anything going on. And, so we bought that house, and then the tornado was some sort of, I hate to say blessing in disguise, but it did pour a ton of insurance money into this house and into a lot of that, the houses and structures in the neighborhood. The biggest visual change was losing our trees. And so the top photo is Eilish. She was 1.5 and out raking leaves like that week, and that the tornado came. And so we had 5 80-foot tall pin oak trees. And then the bottom photo is those trees just all kind of dominoed. They did not hit the house, which was a blessing, because we did max out our insurance. But there is a piece of, there's some wood on the right side of the bottom photo. That is a 6-foot tall privacy fence. So that kind of gives you some perspective of how thick these trees were and their root balls. And here's me and the kids at that time, just 2 of them, sitting on the tree. I looked so thin through the face, and everywhere else, because I had braces on my teeth and I had just gotten them. And so it was hard for me to eat at that point. So I may need to do something like that again. But anyway, the picture, the kids are Brogan, the redhead, is 1, and then Eilish is 2.5. I think I may have said she was 1.5. So 1 and 2.5. And we had been there just right out a year when this happened. And then we met all of our neighbors out in the street. So that was we had a welcome to the neighborhood a year later. And so, we all really came together as a community to put our neighborhood back together. So baby number 3 came along a few years after the tornado, Rory. And so this is the 3 girls in front of one of the shrubs at 2201 State. And then that following year, 2000, at the end of 2002, 2003, we had an opportunity to get the house we live in now, 1910 South Arch. It was a 4-block move, and we only sold our other house, the yellow brick, to get this house. We had a reverse contingency on our real estate offer. And I used this photo from Google because I thought it was so funny that the Google photo right now, is if you go look up 1910 South Arch, has my ghost ornaments from Halloween hanging in the yard. So I used that. But last September, we celebrated 20 years in this house, the Martin Tunna Folk House. And can't believe, our kids have, that our baby, who's 21, has, grown up here in such a beautiful place. And so here's just a few photos of the inside. It's such a gorgeous house. And when we were buying it, people could not figure out, because we were giving up the curb appeal of the other house for this house. And I just always prayed no one would come inside and look at it. Because it's so gorgeous on the outside, even though the outside has been smothered in stucco. That happened in 1924. But this parquet flooring is from 1892, and then all the woodwork was painted white in 1924. So there's quarter-stone oak woodwork everywhere, but it is all covered in white paint. In the contract for Judge Folk in 1924, it said that the woodwork would be sanded, stripped of its varnish, and then like Luxbury Brothers primer #1 would be applied, followed by Sherwin-Williams white #2, and that they would leave the judge a 1-quart paint can and a paintbrush for touch-up. So anyway, the previous family before us, the Guthries, they had the house in a family trust, and they stripped the staircase. That's the one thing that was stripped, and they even got tired of doing that and hired that out to be finished. You can see the staircase a little bit on the left of this large photo. So here's a photo looking from the back of the house to the front door. The house has 10-foot tall pocket doors, which is a little bit unusual. And then here's a historic photo. I think from around 1912, there is something that's called like a little piano advertisement book, and the house and the family, it said something like, Mrs. Tunna loves her Baldwin piano. So that's the photo from that. And Scott and I on the front porch when the house was on the spring tour, and some original architectural plans from 1924. We don't have the ones from 1892. Everyone sort of assumes it's a Gibb house designed by Frank Gibb, because of the arched windows and the gables, but no one really knows for sure. But we have so enjoyed this house. It's a house where, we felt like we get to live here. And we enjoy taking care of it and doing what it needs, and not just taking the easy route out. And, when there is a problem, we haven't had very many problems, but like at the beginning of COVID, we figured out that our sewer line that was in a wall by the front door had been seeping for a long time. And so during COVID, I mean, we're having that parquet floor, having to mess with it, and the wall and the ceiling to chase down the line, and doing a tax credit on that. But yeah, so we really enjoy this home and getting to share it. And I will tell you, and all this time, like when my children were small, my main thing that I was doing was starting to volunteer with my local preservation group, with the Quapaw Quarter Association. I helped for years, do the Christmas tour and the spring tour and any event, we had at the Villa Marie. They still own the Villa Marie at that time. And then when they moved over to Curran Hall, I helped over there and even worked over there as a visitor's helper. But that was how I was involved. I was involved with Preserve Arkansas just a little bit, but mainly, so I was just doing a lot of volunteering. That was my, passion and my outlet, when I had time to be away from my small children and could leave them to Scott or whoever. That's what I was involved in. And so in 2017, when I got asked if our home could be on the tour, I mean, really, I was like, oh my God, we've arrived. Our home is good enough to be on the tour, on this tour that I've worked on for years. And by that time, about, 20 years of helping, with the nonprofit stuff. So that was really, really very gratifying. And it was also doubly gratifying, even up until the day the house was on the tour. And I've been getting ready for it for 9 months. Scott was still saying, no, we're not on the tour. No, I said no. So that's kind of our joke is, the day the people are coming in, he's saying the house is not on tour. But it was, just very special to hear people ooh and ah and enjoy hearing about the house, and Scott overhear that too. I mean, I think it made it worth all the pain of getting it ready, cleaning for days. But anyway, so here was but this is what ended up being my first tax credit project. So here's the before picture of this kitchen. So the front of the house, you saw how beautiful that was. I mean, it was pretty much like that when we bought the house, except for changing paint colors. The kitchen looked just like this. And it was difficult to use. The kitchen had a flue that went up the back wall. So the previous owner had done a peninsula, to encapsulate the flue space. And then he was very tall. And so he put in a freestanding stove in this very tall peninsula base. And my children would sit across the other side of the peninsula. And, again, they're small, they're like 2, 6 and 7, thereabouts. And, if I reached across to them to give them more macaroni or hand them a napkin or whatever, I mean, it's almost like Mrs. Doubtfire. I mean, you could burn your breast off leaning across the stove because it was like right there. And then the stove, it was very old. It was hard to get parts for, and I didn't want to buy a new stove because I was holding out to redo this kitchen. And, we lived there for several years, really figuring in that time, figuring out if we could do the kitchen, what would we do to the kitchen? And so we had the idea, and the first architect we hired fired me. And I stood there and cried as he handed me his roll of tissue paper and told me I could draw it myself. Just because we had told him what we wanted, and then he didn't draw what we asked him to draw. He drew something completely different. And, and I said, well, this, what happened to what we asked for? And he got his feelings hurt. So then I went back, our good friends, Jennifer and Jeff, Heron Horton Architects, we talked to them initially about doing it, but they were very, very busy. And so now I called her back crying. I've been fired by the architect I barely hired. I had to pay him $1,500 for drawings I could not use. And anyway, so I told Jennifer exactly what I wanted, and she drew it. And, we changed some minor little details about it, but we had a couple of inheritances that year, the following year, and we worked for months on the budget and, taking things out to try to get the numbers down, adding stuff in because we couldn't live without it and whatever else. So the pictures you're seeing is the before picture and the after picture of the same view. So it's the same wall. We had the chimney taken out. There's 2 windows on that wall, and they're still there, and they're visible on the back side of the house, but they're not visible in the kitchen because that was the wall that where we could put anything. The other walls all have openings, door openings in them, that were there already, so we couldn't do much. And so anyway, we did this project, and about the time, a little bit after we finished it up, or before we finished it up, the state had legislated the state tax credit program, and that had been something that Preserve Arkansas had really pushed for, advocated for, and I think Vanessa McEwen was the lead at that time. And Missy McSwain was the director at HPP, and she was very instrumental at that time. And then I was hearing about the tax credit because I was involved with QQA and just always, hearing that, this would be a really great tool if we could get this for historic property owners. So lo and behold, we get the state tax credit. I'm finishing up this project around the time frame, and someone got me in touch with Tom Marr at the Historic Preservation Office and said, talk to Tom, we've got the new program. So Tom actually came over and looked at the kitchen and looked at my before photos. That's where I lucked out, is I had a ton of before photos that were very good. And anyway, he really encouraged me to do the application process and that it could be done retroactively. And they didn't have any applications yet because it was such a new program. So he sent me the paperwork, and I decided, I would undertake this. And he coached me a lot. I could call like most people do, and we would go over the wording of things because I had never done this before. And then also, with it retroactively, you have to write it like you're going to do it, and that it's not already done. This was a back porch, the second back porch that had been added on and enclosed. That we didn't have a full downstairs bath. So this large back porch area that was like a junk room. And I let my kids, it was their playroom. They had every piece of plastic known to man of their toys in that room. And so we had this drawn out to be a bathroom with a full shower, and then a potential laundry on the other side of the shower wall. But anyway, same thing. So, yes, apply for the tax credits. And I'm going to tell you, trying to raise 3 little girls and, do the stuff I'm already volunteered into and family stuff. And I had a part-time job and working at Curran Hall. I mean, it was just like I could not wrap my mind around doing this paperwork. I'd sit and try to do it. I remember being in my kitchen on the island trying to do it and the children, coming in wanting something and just thinking, I'm never going to get a tax credit because I cannot get the paperwork done. But I finally did, like after 6 months, got the paperwork done. And Scott, he was in his own little world. I mean, I would talk to him about the tax credit and it was just like, indifference. And so I got it turned in and then I had a $25,000 tax credit certificate. Because we had done, you had to do, as a homeowner, as a residential, you're capped out at $100,000. So we'd spent obviously way more than that, but we could claim, we could get $100,000 worth of that back, 25% of it at the time. Now, it's up to 30%. But so I had a $25,000 tax credit certificate. It's a piece of paper with a border around it, and it says, $25,000 tax credit certificate, good for this year to these years. And I showed it to Scott, and I think if he'd understood it, he would have been all about it, but he still was sort of indifferent. Because now, I mean, we really enjoy using our tax credits against our Arkansas income taxes. But at the time, he was just like, eh. So it's transferable. So I went out and talked to banks, called banks, and nobody, knew what was going on. Nobody's familiar with the historic tax credit. And so it took a few weeks to finally get a bank that, because they were all like, oh, I have to talk to my, head, my boss, or I have to talk to this person. So it's constantly having to get back in touch with them. Did you talk to so-and-so? Can you do this? And so I think we did find one of the local banks to buy it for 84%, which was like a $19,000 cash, of funding that $25,000 tax credit to cash. Let me tell you, I had Scott Jones's full attention when I told him, basically brought him, $20,000 cash. So at that point, like we know all of our neighbors. We're down here, we're a very close-knit community. We have monthly potluck in different homes because we're also curious about where each other lives. And so we know who's working on their property or their office or whatever. And so Scott started going to talk to other people. And it wasn't to create a job for me, but it was just to say, hey, we did this work and we got this awesome benefit back. You should consider this. And so it was, oh, have Amber come talk to me about it. And so I had the blank paperwork. I would go sit down and say, you fill this out this way. You put these photos with this, this is how you do it. And people would be like, oh, no, I don't want to do it. How much would you charge to do it? And so it was like, oh. And so really that is how my business began, was figuring out, how much to charge people, to do this paperwork so they could get, a return on maintaining their property. So I did that kind of part-time, word of mouth. I was working for another nonprofit. And, we were doing other work on our house and, just doing it kind of here and there. I think back then I know initially I think I was charging $300 per part. And typically there's 3 parts. And it's significantly gone up from that. But yeah, so that is how it got started. This is not the best photo, but it was about the best I could do. This is a bungalow that we own next door to our home. And in 2011, we had renters, and it wasn't through really any fault of the renters, but we had a fire in this rental property that is next door to our home. So this became my first federal and state project. And this was a house that we had inherited from our neighbors, Bonnie and Paul Wallace. And when they bought it in 1984, it had been a triplex. And they had taken it back to single family, and they had left the little area on the left side of the house, on the left side of the porch, there's 3 windows, one partially obscured by shrub. But they left that part because Paul used that as his workshop that on the front of the house. It had a door, a side door from the front porch. Um, so and the renters were using the fireplace, which had been inspected, but an ember shot through the mortar into the interior of the exterior wall. So the fire was burning in the wall, but you couldn't tell it from the inside of the house. In fact, when I realized that there were fire trucks here for our house and not Paris Towers, and that the fire was on the corner, so I had to walk past the house. The front door was open, and it was surreal. It looked beautiful inside. It was all aglow with lamps and furnishings and looked very homey. And then I get around the corner on the other side of the house, and there is fire going all the way up the side. Over here, this other picture, you can see how it burned straight up the fireplace chimney. When it got to the attic, it flashed in the attic. So anyway, this is what we were faced with at the beginning of 2011. This had been a mantle that was a replacement mantle that when they had taken the house back to single family, that the mantle was destroyed by the fire. And so the Park Service let us submit something that was in like a 1912, 1917 wood catalog. And they approved this fireplace mantle. So we had this fabricated by one of the workers that worked on the job. But so that's new, but built to look old. And so here it is. And we also took off that little enclosure on the front porch. And so, we put some integrity back, as well as rehabbing it from the fire. We did have, and then we changed, went to this beautiful paint job. It went from almost looks like a black and white to a color photo, but they're all color photos. And it's still a rental property today. And when I do tax credit PowerPoint presentations, I do these little workups on projects of how much the project costs and what your return is on your investment with the tax credits. So we did have insurance on this, but because of depreciation, they were barely covering, on the where they wanted us to repair the wood going up the side of the fireplace, they didn't allow for us to feather it back in. They just wanted us to, put straight up. So it was everything was costing more than they were giving us. So we took out a construction loan. So overall, it's like we spent $176,000 on the project. And then we also added things into the project to help with energy efficiency, like storm windows and new HVAC equipment, insulating, some things like that. At the time, the review fees to the Park Service were $800 and the state review fee is $400, which that's still the same. On federal, so we earned a 20% federal credit and a 25% state credit. And so we use the federal credit on our federal income taxes, and then the state tax credit, again, that was at 25% at the time. And we sold that to a bank and got almost $37,000 back, which we then used to apply to pay down the construction loan. And then, and then we were able, we got some, unfortunately, the people that had been renting it now could not afford to rent it for the type of rent we needed to get out of it, given that all the improvements and restoring it. But even at the time, the city, this is how they caught it and put it in their rental inspection program, was because of the fire, the meters got pulled, and so it got flagged and all this. And when the code enforcement came to sign off that it was inhabitable, ready to rent, He was like, "You've done too much." And it's like, we just put back what it was, aside from doing some energy upgrades. Um, but anyway, so that is how I got into doing federal and state applications. Then I also ended up doing things like National Register listings, and this was a fun project. It was also a project though that I wanted to at times, shake the owners. And they even said when they got their preservation award that they were their worst enemies, because they just did not understand things. But they wanted to do, Polk Stanley Wilcox Architects bought this building to be their offices. But they'd never done a historic project before, and they wanted to do tax credits, but the building had to be listed to the National Register because it wasn't in a district. And man, if this could be a Barbie project, this could be it, because this was a woman-owned auto parts store. And Mrs. Winchester had the interior, one little area built out for her dressing room, for her office, for her cedar closet, for her furs, a little personal bathroom, so she didn't have to share a bathroom with the mechanics. It was just very well thought out. And another interesting thing about the history of this building was that Mr. and Mrs. Winchester grew apparently to hate each other. He was quite a bit older than she was, and they had multiple stores. He had one in Pine Bluff, and he, in his later days, he just did the Pine Bluff store and lived in Pine Bluff, and she had this Little Rock store and lived in Little Rock, and they just tried not to interfere with each other at all as much as possible. The issue that the architects had was everything that they wanted to do to the building was going to affect its integrity. And its integrity is what made it eligible for the National Register. So even like the front door, which on this Art Moderne building is there at the corner, the rounded corner, they did not want that to be the front door. And they wanted to block it up and with other blocks. They thought that would be a good solution. Well, it'll match the blocks, we'll just block it up. And I told them I don't think that'll be allowed. And why don't you just get a new commercial door and then just lock the door and don't use it? What's wrong with that? And so that is ultimately what they ended up doing. But so we had this learning curve on the project. And the same thing, here's the front door. So this is a replacement door anyway. So, but they wanted to block up get rid of that door and just put glass block in the opening. But they did pick out a very nice commercial door for that. And then all the repair and cleaning, it looks so much better. But like this garage door is the original garage door from when this building operated as a garage back on this part of it. You could pull your car in, and have your battery changed out or get new belts or tires. And so this is the original door, and they wanted some modern doors. And so, showed them about keeping your old door, but if you just got to have new doors, maybe add them in, but keep this, or just keep it in the up position and use the others. And it was so funny because it's like, oh my God, that's such an ingenious idea. And it's like, well, it's not, maybe it was ingenious and wonderful, and it is wonderful, but it's not new. It's an old idea, but they had never heard of doing that before. But ultimately they restored the door. You can see it down here on the bottom. It's just gorgeous. And the inside is amazing too. And it's just great to see the building back in use. This is an apartment, a historic apartment in a historic apartment building. And this was the sunroom on the side of the building, and the new owners decided to make it the master bathroom. And as you can see, it's just over the top. Who wouldn't want to use this beautiful bathroom? Here was the kitchen, and and it's just very old and dated. The wallpaper is cool. Someone tried to make a punch with those white cabinets and that wallpaper, but that, the new idea with it really, opened it up even further and maintain, the integrity of not blocking up that space. So that, that's just so sleek, so nice to work on something like that. This was such a cool project for many ways. It was a cool project to find these Coke bottle medallions. This is the Coca-Cola building in Morrilton. It is, I never can think of, there used to be Crow Construction, now there's something else, but they are a contracting company. And initially there was a drop ceiling in the building, and I got called when they took the drop ceiling down to come see what they found. And so they found all these medallions in this state. And so I went looking for the historic plans at the old State House, because this was a Charles Thompson build. And so we did, found these gorgeous plans, which they have a copy of the plans, framed on their walls. I mean, they're so proud of it. So that was the fun surprise on this building. Here is the actual bottling room that frieze was at the decorative part of this room. So this is now their conference room. Here it is finished. A photo from above so you could see those better. This part of the building was the horrific and unfortunate surprise that we got fixed, but it was just interesting. So this is a terracotta block and that was never covered, and this portion of the building was added on when it was built as Walmart number 8 in the state of Arkansas, but the first Walmart of Morrilton. And so it's added on to the Coca-Cola building, and this is its natural state. So that's the finished wall product. But the owners did not like the terracotta block, and they wanted to cover it up, with gypsum, with sheetrock. And I told them, I said, we just have to wait to, let's put it in the application what you want to do, but don't do it. We need to wait for the Park Service. And so I kept checking in with them because, again, they're contractors. They do their own work. And I was really concerned that they were going to go in there and, cover it up with sheetrock. And I kept checking in with him. He assured me as it wasn't covered up with sheetrock. We got the approval and the conditions sheet back, and there was a condition not to cover this up. And I text him and I say, oh, it's a good thing you didn't cover that up. Well, then he sends me a picture of it covered up. And I'm just like, So at that point, I've been doing a lot of federal projects, and I was on very good terms with the reviewer, Ann Grimmer. And Tom Marr told me, he said, well, you're probably one of the few people that could actually pick up the phone and call her. And so I did. I called her and asked if we could talk about this project. And she immediately said, they covered up that block, didn't they? And I said, yes. And she said, well, let me discuss it with my other reviewers. They have a meeting with other reviewers for problem child cases. And so anyway, so we had to wait another week or two, and then she got back with me and she said, yeah, he's going to have to uncover it because we really feel, it's an integral part of the integrity. So go back to them and say, you've got to uncover it. And they come at me with, oh, but the blocks are broken because we used a nail gun to install the other stuff. And this is wrong. And this is going to be wrong. And I'm just like, they don't care. They want it uncovered. If you want all of your tax credits, you're going to have to uncover this. So here we have the end result with the other photos of it uncovered. They did get permission to have the sheetrock at the bottom of the wall. And so they've got their conduit and cabling hidden in that. But it looks really nice, especially when you've got all this white everywhere, to have these interesting terracotta blocks of different variation. And about a year or two later, I was working on another project with this owner, different building. And he said, those terracotta blocks? And I said, yeah. He said, God, I really love those things now. And I was like, good. That's what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to gain appreciation for your building and not want to destroy it. And so so that was really a very neat project for multiple reasons. This is a current project where I go to take the after photos, and this is what I am met with. So someone kind of lost their mind when they were repairing some brick areas. This picture on the far right had been a door, and they got permission to take out the door and put a window back in. And they said, that the bricks would match as close as possible. And if you look closely, the texture matches, but the color and the variation of color in the mortar in some areas is a total miss. So this one is having to be corrected. And it's things like this that, as long as I've done this, since about 2010, it makes me keep adding to my criteria of what I tell people and the things that you think people will never do, that they would know better. If the 1% is going to do something like remove the historic trim and put different trim, it's like you have to say something. And even though most people would say, oh, I would never do that, it's like, well, let me just put it out there, because if you do it, it's a problem. And that actually came up in the last couple of months of me walking into a project at the end of it, and the original trim is gone. Is not only is it gone, but there is something else in its place that is not even close to it. And so something, that had to be corrected for them to get their tax credit. Because it is an all or nothing program. And so if you have one element that either, you didn't get approved, or you forgot to mention it in your application, or, you thought, as in these bricks, that this was good enough. Yeah. So, this is being worked on now, and I looked at it last week and was looking so much better. So I'm anxious to see, hopefully, go over there and it'll look like, this never happened. This is my last project I'm really going to kind of profile, and then I've got some other little family photos. But this is what was RAO Video, and maybe this would be Barbie and Ken's, adult video store. Because this is what it was. It was the first adult video store in Arkansas. It was at 609 Main Street, and one of the last buildings down there to have, this kind of brutalist slipcover. It's metal. It's supposed to look like granite. But Mr. John Chandler bought the building. I've done a lot of projects with him. And so we had to go through this preliminary heartburn of getting this off the facade and seeing what the facade looked like. So this is picture on the right. You can see, it's not a really great picture to see what it really looked like, but you can see that the building is behind this grid of structural steel. Anyway, we had to get all of that off so that we could even make an assessment. And then the assessment, unfortunately, it's like they had beat up, chiseled out the limestone, removed the cornice, just really beat the heck out of this building to get this slipcover on there tightly. He had to basically rebuild the front of the building, the limestone work, and the cornice and the storefront. And so then we applied for individual listing on the National Register, because there was not a district right there. And unfortunately, the Park Service came back and said that, while it looks great now, that they felt like there was too much new material on the front of the building for it to be listed individually. But they had a backup plan, fortunately, because all Mr. Chandler wanted was his tax credits for this expensive project. But that the Capital Main district is very close right there. And they talked to Ralph Wilcox, National Register staff, about extending that historic district to include these buildings. And so they would be contributing to a district and eligible for the tax credits. And they asked me if I was okay with that. I said, we're okay with anything that gets us tax credits. So anyway, that has been like a 2-year process of just getting the facade fixed. So anyway, we've got this beautiful facade to look at, and it was, quite a dramatic change. And the inside is pretty modest, but it's beautiful. It's got glass offices and big wide spaces in the center. It's just lovely. And he's going to have his office there. They make camouflage and camouflage clothing. So he's an international trader in this material. So I think it's perfect, for Barbie could have a camouflage outfit from there. Anyway, so just a few more photos. My family and we're Star Wars geeks. We love decorating the house. We love decorating ourselves. Family photos from when one daughter, our oldest daughter, the brunette, graduated from American University in Washington, D.C., and we had family photos made in Washington. And then some photos at my parents' farm. When the youngest daughter graduated. I love all things antlers on the head. My family calls this my ridiculousness for my head. And so now the whole family kind of gets into it. They used to be really embarrassed about it. They did not want me to wear antlers at Christmas. And now it's like we're all fighting over whose, favorite pair of antlers. And then my husband and I on my family horses, shortly after, I think we were married there. And then now we have 2 Appaloosas at my mother's that we got as 6-month-olds. And those 2 horses are brother and sister. These other 2 horses in the other photo were father and son. And then here's me on my horse, Sassy, and a couple of my mom's dogs that have passed on since that photo, but we have other replacement dogs. And then my Sassy horse with her tongue sticking out and her hair blowing in the wind. So that kind of wraps it up. So I hope that was interesting enough and kept you glued to your screen.
Thank you, Amber. Excellent job. You
Thank
have
you.
some questions.
Uh-oh.
It's okay. There's nothing too difficult in here.
Okay, so you say.
Um, let's see. You have several people telling you that they're watching. Amy Jones, Susan Emery, and Osceola, Crystal George. Okay, first question. How complicated is it to file for a federal tax credit as a retro, meaning the renovation has already been completed?
Tom Maher and I both do not recommend it. I mean, you can, and there is application process for that, and then it also depends if your building is listed individually or it's in a district. But because you can really sometimes shoot yourself in the foot if you're not, familiar with all the issues. But the main thing that you really get into with it is you cannot, with the federal, you cannot go sit down with them and show them your before photos and show them your after photos and say, is this okay? Or do you see something that's an issue? You've got to go through these 30-day waiting processes from the moment it gets to them. So it depends on how long it takes to get out of the state office. But if you've done work that they will not approve, then you are left to, have to undo that work to get it to pass. And a lot of people don't want to do that. I do some more, I don't know, I probably do about 5 a year that are retroactive, but I take, I gather all the before photos and can always get the after photos, but I go sit down with Tom Maher. And that would be something I would advise too, is if you are considering that, is to go sit down with him and show him your before and after photos, and then ask him if he thinks you could file or it would be a good candidate, or if he sees any potential issues. But that's what I do on the state ones, is I look at them, and then if I see something that's a red flag, I'll make a list of the things I think are issues, and then I go sit down with Tom, simply because, I know what I'm talking about. But you may not, but just to go sit down and, see if he sees anything that jumps out at him as an issue. If you had architectural plans for that project, I'd take those too. But yeah, but it's usually not recommended. I even had a client recently that she did not want to do federal going into her project, so we didn't. And then at the end of the project, when she's understanding more about tax credits, she's now wanting to apply for federal. And it's just like, no. And Tom was even like, and there were some things, because the programs are aligned, the state and the federal, but it's so subjective that, Tom, even if he told you he thought something was okay, you still could get flagged by the Park Service because, it's another person with different thoughts.
Right. And the bottom line is it's always better to do it the right way and get your approvals before you lift a hammer so you don't have to undo anything.
Yes, yeah.
But sometimes
And
it can be done.
sometimes it can be done. Sometimes the undoables are easy, but sometimes they're not, so it just depends. And I hate to leave it like that, but that's how it is. Every project is so different.
Okay, next question from Lisa Skiles. I appreciated your note that the home was eligible for a tax credit because of its neighborhood. The minimum requirement is National Register of Historic Places listing, or that the neighborhood is listed. So I'm guessing she's asking about individual or district.
Yeah, so you either have to be a contributing structure in a historic district to be eligible, or you have to be individually listed. So you could be a non-contributing structure in a historic district, or you could also be a non-classified structure in a historic district, but you've got to be contributing to the district to be eligible.
Okay. And do you find all banks are now knowledgeable and open to the cash option?
No.
I wish they were.
I know. It's really, I've heard from different people that Bank of the Ozarks here in Arkansas, especially if you have an account there, that that they are open to it, but I've also heard that they pay lower rates, like 77%. I'm not sure what their going rate is now. That was a couple of years ago, I was hearing that. I refer all of my clients to Commerce Bank of Missouri, simply because our program is modeled off of Missouri's, because they've had a state tax credit program forever, almost as long as the federal program, I guess. And so their banks, they know about this, but I don't know. It's just, we're just slow to, for anybody to want to mess with it, I guess. And Commerce Bank, the Peggy Stepp, I work with there. She's just so nice and easy to work with and gets her paperwork correct. I hear horror stories from other buyers at times where, they just can't get their transfer paperwork correct. And then that just holds you up getting your tax credit funded. But anyway, but no, it's not any better. I wish someone would work on that.
Yeah. Thank you. We got lots of education to do for bankers. Okay, someone asked if you do talks about how to use historic tax credits.
Yes, I do tax credit presentations around the state. I can do Zoom. I have a tax credit PowerPoint That now I changed it a couple of years ago where I actually show you how to do it. I used to just do like the general info, like, here's the part one, here's the part two. And now I show examples of, this is how you can do it. And then if you don't feel like you can do it, then you can reach out to me, and see if I want to do it. But yeah, so I have a full-time job, all over the state. Doing tax credit applications. And then I don't know, I probably do about 5 or 6 tax credit presentations a year. So,
Thank you. And then speaking of that, how do people find you if they're interested in hiring you?
we can send out my information, but if you do Facebook, my Facebook page is Amber Carter Jones. And my cell number is out there. Or my cell number is 501-607-0954. My easy email is ambercj@swbell.net. And I also have amber@preservationconsulting.com if you can spell preservation consulting correctly.
Or if all else fails, you can contact Preserve Arkansas and we'd be happy to.
There you go. They
refer
might
people.
give my contact info up.
Yes, we'd be happy to refer folks who are interested. And let's see, we'll do one more. Lisa Skiles is asking, so we're talking Fayetteville, Northwest Arkansas is where this is coming from. Best place to see graphics of historic district boundaries for neighborhoods. And she's saying Fayetteville has a good interactive map of the districts. And I'll just add, so does Little Rock, but that's not the case across the state. Amber, do you have any tips for the best?
Well, Ralph sent me a link to a Google Earth that supposedly has all the districts. If that's what they're looking for. I mean, it depends on what you mean by the districts. Like if you're just looking for a boundary map, it will, it has those files, the historic district boundary files on it. So when you click on a district, it like zooms in on the Google Earth and then it'll show you the boundaries. But I can probably forward the link, or you can contact Ralph or Travis at AHPP for the Google Earth districts.
Thank you. And then like for a listing of the contributing, non-contributing in the districts, is there any other tip on that?
I find the AHP website so difficult to navigate. Recently I found something that I had not been able to get to before. I was like, oh, maybe I'm doing this wrong, but then it didn't help later on. So I think I just got lucky on something, but, I just stick with the tried and true, and I email Ralph or Travis at AHPP, the address, and ask if it's contributing or listed or what, I send them, and that's always so important. Is send the actual address. If you're complaining about something in your historic district, you need to send the address. If you're looking for, want to find out if a house is contributing, send the address, house number, street number, city, to Travis or Ralph, and they will, and if it is, they'll send you the historic survey. And hopefully they'll tell you if it is contributing or not contributing.
Right. Better to be safe on that one. You can pull the entire National Register nomination for the district and look through it yourself, but things may have changed.
Yeah.
Since it was listed.
Well, I mean, and that's so true. That is so true. I mean, and that happens, unfortunately, where you think something's contributing. And that's why you have the part one, that's what it's for, is to rubber stamp that something that we all think is contributing is still contributing, because maybe, it's had changes to the facade or to the front porch, since it was last surveyed. and no one knows until you turn in the part one. I like locally and Google is good for this too, just putting it in Google Maps. Someone will ask me about a property in another part of the state, and I'll, pull up Google Maps and see what the front of it, and see if the front looks like the same picture, similar picture that's on the survey. Because sometimes they don't. And it's not good.
Thank you, Amber, and thank you all for watching. Hope we'll see you next month on March the 12th for Mary Beth Truebit. And thanks again. Bye, everybody.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for all my friends that watched.